At 7:24 p.m. on December 28th, a burglar alarm began to sound in the wealthiest neighborhood of Dover, Massachusetts. It was a hollow, mechanical noise, drifting across the snow-covered lawns of Wilson's Way. In this part of town, an alarm usually means a malfunction, a sensor tripped by the wind, or perhaps a door opened by a guest arriving late for a holiday party. This is a place where privacy is the most expensive commodity. The homes here are set back from the road, hidden behind iron gates and long driveways. It is a place where problems are solved with checkbooks and silence is guaranteed. But on this Thursday night, the alarm at number 8 Wilson's Way wasn't signaling a break-in. It was signaling an end. The house itself was a fortress. 21 rooms, 11 bedrooms. Valued at over $4 million. It was the kind of home that is supposed to insulate a family from the chaos of the outside world. When a relative arrived to check on the noise, the house was dark. The driveway was quiet. There were no footprints in the snow leading away. But there was something taped to the front door. A single, white piece of standard printer paper. It didn't say help. It didn't say danger. It was a typed note. Calm, administrative. The kind of memo you might find in a corporate office or a bank lobby. It read, "Please note, before entering, call the police to first check 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Each room will be marked by a white sheet of paper." It was a set of instructions, a curated discovery. Whoever taped that note to the door had taken the time to print it, format it, and place it perfectly at eye level. They wanted to ensure that the person who found it would follow the rules. They wanted to control the narrative, even after the silence had set in. Because inside that fortress, the chaos hadn't been kept out. It had been locked in. What happens when a man spends years building a perfect life, only to realize he can't afford the maintenance? What happens when the only thing more terrifying than death is the truth? Most tragedies are messy. They are loud, chaotic, and sudden. But the tragedy at A. Wilson's Way was different. It was quiet, it was organized, and it was terrifyingly polite. To understand the silence of December 28th, we have to understand the noise that usually filled the Kamal household. Rakesh Kamal, known to everyone as Rick, was the architect of a life that looked from the outside like the American dream, fully realized. At 57 years old, he was a man who seemed to have mastered the equation of success. He was a graduate of Boston University and the prestigious MIT Sloan School of Management. He was an entrepreneur, a polished speaker, and a man who wore suits with the ease of someone who belonged in boardrooms. His wife, Teena, was his equal in every measure. A graduate of Harvard and Delhi University, she had served on the board of the American Red Cross of Massachusetts. She was described by friends as elegant, driven, and deeply devoted to her family. And then there was Arianna. Aria, 18 years old. A freshman at Middlebury College in Vermont. She was home for her first winter break, bringing with her the energy of a young woman whose life was just beginning to expand. She sang in the college choir. Her professors called her brilliant and spiritual. She was the kind of daughter parents boast about at dinner parties, the tangible proof that all the hard work had been worth it. Together, they lived in the estate on Wilson's Way. If you were to drive past it in the winter of 2023, you would see a monument to stability. 19,000 square feet of living space, a private theater, a library, a home that required a staff to maintain and a fortune to heat. It was the stage for a perfect life. And like any good stage production, it had a director. Rick Kamal. He was the one who managed the finances. He was the one who handled the mail. He was the one who ensured that the lights stayed on and the world saw only what he wanted it to see. But in the months leading up to that final Christmas, there were small, almost imperceptible glitches in the performance. It started with the money. Not a sudden collapse, but a strange, quiet erosion. Rick began reaching out to his younger brother, Manoj. He didn't ask for millions. He asked for $5,000 here, $10,000 there. He called it a cash flow issue, a temporary bridge. He said he was waiting for a deal to close or a transfer to clear. He even borrowed money from his elderly mother's account. For a man living in a $4 million mansion, these were odd sums. They were the kind of amounts you borrow to keep the lights on, not the kind you borrow to run an empire. But Rick had an explanation for everything. He was a storyteller. When creditors called, he told them his father-in-law had died, buying himself weeks of sympathy and silence. In reality, his father-in-law was alive and well. It was a lie that was easy to tell, but impossible to untell. And that is the danger of a life built on perception. Once you start editing the truth, you can never stop. You have to keep cutting, keep hiding, keep curating the reality for everyone around you, especially for the people sleeping down the hall. Teena and Arianna went about their days in that massive house, walking on floors they no longer owned, sleeping in beds that legally belonged to a bank. They didn't know that the stage they were standing on was already burning. They only saw the director, calm and smiling, telling them that everything was going to be fine. The erosion of the Kamal family fortune didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing slide that Rick Kamal managed in total secrecy. It began years earlier, in 2021, when their company, Edu Nova, was dissolved. For most entrepreneurs, a business failure is a painful but survivable chapter. You declare bankruptcy, you downsize, you start over. But for Rick, the company wasn't just a business, it was the identity. Without it, the house, the status, and the respect of the community became anchors he could no longer lift. In September 2022, Teena's name appeared on a Chapter 13 bankruptcy filing. It listed liabilities of up to $10 million. But then, the case was dismissed. Why? Because the required forms were never filed. The documentation just vanished. It is entirely possible, and terrifyingly likely, that Rick sabotaged the bankruptcy process to avoid the public admission of failure it would require. He chose to stay in the burning building rather than pull the fire alarm. By the winter of 2023, the walls were closing in. The foreclosure on the mansion was final. The ownership had transferred to a company called Wilsondale Associates. An eviction notice was issued. The date was set, December 28th. Rick knew this date. He had received the emails. He had seen the court papers. But downstairs, in the kitchen, life went on. Teena was planning for the holidays. Arianna was finishing her first semester exams. They were discussing Christmas dinner, gift exchanges, and plans for the new year. Imagine the psychological pressure of that duality. Every dinner conversation was a minefield. Every time Teena mentioned a future plan, a vacation in the summer, a renovation idea, Rick had to nod and smile, knowing that by that date, they would be homeless. He wasn't just hiding a debt. He was hiding the end of their world. And as the deadline approached, Rick's behavior shifted from desperate to deliberate. He didn't start packing boxes. He didn't look for apartments. He didn't tell his wife. Instead, he went shopping. He purchased a .40 caliber Glock 22 pistol. He wasn't licensed to own firearms in Massachusetts. This wasn't a purchase for sport or protection. It was a purchase for a solution he was already formulating. Then he went to see his brother. It was December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Rick visited Manoj and, in a conversation that seemed casual at the time, handed over details about a life insurance policy. He mentioned he had made changes to the beneficiaries. Manoj would later look back on this moment as a red flag he missed. A goodbye disguised as administrative housekeeping. Rick was tying up loose ends. He was organizing his legacy. He was making sure that even in death, he was the one in control. Christmas Day arrived, the 25th. The family FaceTimed with relatives. They smiled. They wished everyone happy holidays. To the extended family, they looked like the picture of happiness. Teena was radiant. Arianna was excited about her break. Rick was there, smiling, playing the role of the proud father. But inside his mind, a countdown clock was ticking. 72 hours. That was all the time he had left before the constable arrived. Before the eviction crew showed up, before the illusion shattered. On December 26th, the isolation began. Rick sent a text to Manoj. It was short, specific, and designed to keep the world away. Teena and Arya are sick, he wrote. Shrimpeller need to rest. It was the perfect excuse. It garnered sympathy, while ensuring no one would come to the door. No one would call to check in. It bought him the silence he needed. Inside the house, the doors were locked, the alarm was set, and the man who had spent a lifetime building a fortress to protect his family turned that fortress into a cage. December 28th, the day the lease on the illusion expired. At 4 p.m., a constable arrived at 8 Wilson's Way. He wasn't there for a social call. He was there to enforce the final judgment, the eviction. He stood at the massive front door and knocked. He expected confrontation. He expected a distraught family, or perhaps a man begging for more time. Instead, he got silence. The house was locked. The lights were off. The only sound was the wind and the faint, persistent beep of the home security alarm, which had been triggered but not disarmed. The constable left. He likely assumed the family had fled, that they had packed their bags in the night and run from the shame of it all. But they hadn't run. They were still there. We will never know the exact sequence of the final moments inside that house. We don't need to know. The tragedy isn't found in the forensic report or the crime scene photos. It is found in the betrayal. Sometime between the shrimp allergy text on the 26th and the constable's knock on the 28th, Rick Kamal made his choice. He went to the second floor. Teena was in her room. Arianna was in hers. These were the spaces where they felt safest. The bedrooms of a home they loved. The official report tells us it was quick. There were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture, no desperate fight for survival. This suggests that until the very last second, Teena and Arianna didn't see a threat. They saw a husband. They saw a father. They saw the man who had driven them to school, who had cheered at recitals, who had sat at the head of the dinner table for decades. And that is the hardest part of this story to reconcile. Harm usually looks like harm. It comes with shouting, with anger, with a break in reality. But this act came wearing the mask of love. Rick didn't end their lives in a fit of rage. He didn't do it because he hated them. In his warped, collapsing mind, he likely believed he was saving them. Saving them from the eviction notice. Saving them from the bankruptcy hearing. Saving them from the whispers of the neighbors and the judgment of their peers. He took their futures to protect his own ego, but he framed it as protection for them. After it was done, the house fell silent. Rick didn't leave. He didn't try to escape. He went to the bathroom near the master bedroom. And there, alone with the wreckage of his perfect life, he made his final move. The weapon, the unregistered Glock 22, fell to the floor. For 2 days, the house sat quietly in the snow. The mail carrier came and went. The neighbors drove past, seeing the grand estate standing tall and proud. Inside, the future was gone. Arianna would never go back to Middlebury. She would never sing in the choir again. She would never graduate, never fall in love, never start the life she had worked so hard to build. Teena would never realize that the financial ruin she feared was survivable. That money can be lost and made again. That a house is just wood and stone. They were robbed of their choices. Rick Kamal decided that if he couldn't be the successful provider, then no one in that house could be anything at all. When the police arrived at 7:24 p.m. on December 28th, they didn't have to kick down the door. They didn't have to search the woods. The investigation began with a piece of paper. Manoj Kamal, Rick's brother, stood outside in the cold, staring at the note taped to the front door. Please note, before entering, call the police to first check 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. It was a chillingly specific instruction. Even in the aftermath of a massacre, Rick Kamal was still trying to be the manager. He was still trying to direct the flow of information. He wanted the police to find them, not his brother. He wanted a professional discovery, not a familial one. It was a final act of control. When investigators entered, the house was eerily orderly. The alarm was still sounding that low, persistent beep of the home security system, which had been the only soundtrack to the tragedy for 48 hours. They followed the instructions. They went to the 2nd floor. What they found confirmed the worst fears of everyone who knew the family. 3 bodies, 1 gun, and a silence that felt heavier than the architecture itself. But as the initial shock subsided, the real investigation began. And it wasn't a search for a killer he was already found. It was a search for the truth. Detectives began to peel back the layers of the Kamal family's life, and what they found was a hollow shell. The financial autopsy was devastating. The wealthy entrepreneur was millions of dollars in debt. The estate was owned by a holding company. The loans from family members were just drops in a bucket that had no bottom. But the most haunting question wasn't about the money. It was about the knowledge. Did Teena know? Investigators scoured emails, text messages, Vondrits. They looked for arguments, for desperate pleas, for any sign that the wife of this mastermind was in on the secret. They found nothing. Teena's digital footprint was that of a woman looking forward to the future. She was planning, she was organizing, she was living in a reality that her husband had completely fabricated. There was one piece of evidence, however, that gave them pause. A recording surfaced later, where Teena mentioned to a relative that she was so stressed, She felt like driving off a cliff. For a moment, it looked like a clue. Was she suicidal? Did she know the end was coming? But context is everything. Friends and family clarified that this wasn't a death wish. It was an expression of overwhelm. It was the kind of thing people say when they are tired, when they are managing a big house and a busy life. It was a figure of speech. Rick took that stress and made it terminal. The investigation also revealed the cold calculation of the final week. The purchase of the gun, the shrimp allergy text, and, most disturbingly, the life insurance policy. Days before the murders, Rick had attempted to change the beneficiaries on Teena's policy. Why? Legal experts call this the Slayer Rule paradox. In almost every jurisdiction, you cannot profit from a crime you commit. You cannot kill your wife and then collect her life insurance. Rick, a man with an MBA from MIT, surely knew this. So why do it? Psychologists suggest it was a form of magical thinking, a delusion. Perhaps, in his disintegrating mind, he thought he could kill the family, kill himself, and somehow still leave a financial legacy for his brother or his mother. He thought he could cheat the system one last time from beyond the grave. He was trying to solve a math problem with a murder weapon. But the math didn't work. The estate was insolvent. The debts far exceeded the assets. The life insurance policies became tangled in a legal web that would take years to unravel. Instead of leaving a legacy of provision, he left a legacy of ruin. Manoj Kamal, the brother who had loaned him money and tried to help, was left with nothing but the trauma of that night. The community of Dover was left with a boarded-up mansion and a lingering fear. And the world was left with the uncomfortable realization that you can never truly know what happens behind closed doors. Rick Kamal spent years building a facade to hide his failure. In the end, the only thing he successfully revealed was his own hollowness. In a typical criminal case, there is a trial, there is a verdict. There is a moment where the gavel comes down and society says, "This is the price you pay." But for the Kamal family, there was no gavel. There was only a medical examiner's report. The official ruling was homicide-suicide, case closed. For the legal system, it was a tidy ending. The perpetrator was dead. Therefore, there was no one to prosecute. The files were organized, the evidence was catalogued, and the police tape was eventually taken down. But for everyone else, the closure was an illusion. The legal resolution of the case didn't resolve the human wreckage. In the months that followed, the Stachiachi Wilson's Way went from being a home to being an asset in a complicated bankruptcy proceeding. The furniture was likely sold. The personal items, Teena's books, Arianna's music sheets were packed away or discarded. The house itself, the fortress Rick killed to keep, was eventually put back on the market. It was sold to a new owner, stripping away the Kamal name from the deed. It is a cruel irony. The very thing Rick was so desperate to hold on to the status, the address was the first thing to be erased. Voor nós Kamal the Mets a lifelong sense. He has to live with the memory of that night. He has to live with the knowledge that the money he loaned, the help he offered, was used to sustain a lie that ended in murder. And then there is the community. Dover, Massachusetts, is a place designed to feel safe. It is a town of high fences and high achievers. But this tragedy shattered the assumption that success equals safety. It forced neighbors to look one another differently, to wonder if the manicured lawns and the silent driveways were hiding other desperate secrets. But the deepest loss is the one that can't be quantified in a bankruptcy filing. Arianna came while she was 18. She was just starting to find her voice, literally and metaphorically. The Middlebury College Choir held a memorial for her. Friends shared stories of her kindness, her intellect, her spirit. She was the innocent, collateral damage of her father's ego. Rick, Kamal didn't just kill his family. He killed their potential. He decided that their lives were less important than his reputation. He treated them like assets on a balance sheet that had gone into the red. And when he couldn't balance the books, he liquidated the company. This is the terrifying logic of the family annihilator. It isn't a crime of passion. It is a crime of ownership. Rick believed he owned his family. He believed their destiny was inextricably linked to his success. If he fell, they had to fall with him. He couldn't imagine a world where they existed without him or where they witnessed his failure. It is the ultimate act of narcissism disguised as mercy. And so, the case is closed. The house is sold, the debts are settled. But the silence remains. When we look at a tragedy like the Kamal family murders, we instinctively want a villain. We want a monster with a history of violence, someone whose evil is visible from miles away. It makes us feel safe. It allows us to say, I would never let someone like that into my life. But Rick Kamal wasn't a monster you could spot in a lineup. He was the man next door. He was the successful entrepreneur. He was the father cheering at the recital. He was a monster made of ordinary things' pride, shame, and silence. And that is the quiet terror of this case. It forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people we share our lives with? Teena Kamal slept beside a man for decades who was capable of planning her execution in a spreadsheet. Arianna Kamal was raised by a father who viewed her life as collateral for his own failure. They didn't see it coming because the threat didn't look like a threat. It looked like love. There is one final detail about that note on the door. Liznocci. It was a request for order, a plea for dignity in the face of horror. But there is no dignity in what happened at 8 Wilson's Way. There is only the tragic truth that some men would rather destroy their world than admit they couldn't save it. We often fear the stranger in the dark alley. We install alarms to keep the intruder out. But sometimes, the danger isn't waiting outside the gate. Sometimes, the danger is the one holding the keys. This has been a quiet crime story. Thank you for listening.